going back to the example that I gave earlier, I talked about there being 1 million legal documents that the RAG system searches over, and then it pulls out a dozen documents. Those documents could each be 10 pages long. So then you're talking about 120 pages of context. And if the LLM was optimized for a question like, what's the capital of France? then yeah, I could imagine you run into issues. So do you want to fill us more in about this, the kinds of issues that arise? For example, it seems like there's trade-offs between the benefits of longer inputs versus this becoming a new risk surface, a new attack surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're really hitting the nail on the head here. RAG is incredibly powerful. There's a lot of investment from companies that build large language models into increasing the possible context length. But at the same time, increasing the possible context length also requires developing methods and developing the models to actually be able to handle such a context length rather than just being able to handle them by having an attention that goes long enough back. So here there are a couple of considerations. In our paper, what we evaluated was how does context length really influence the safety angle? And we found that, especially for safety, there seems to be this effect where the more context you put in, the more likely the model is to forget the built-in safety guardrails, or this alignment that people talk about. Which absolutely shouldn't happen if you're considering how RAG is set up, because again, you're adding innocuous, completely harmless information, and just because there's a long context doesn't mean that the language model needs to behave any differently from if you just post in what's the capital of France. At the same time, the context length question actually has also massive implications of how we build RAG systems. In practice, retrieval systems have multiple components too. We've been kind of glossing over this point where you just say, oh yeah, there's a search system and there's a database. But often you have things like, okay, how do I parse the query? If I ask a question, to what time frame should I limit the search results? Am I filtering to particular industries, sectors, companies, any kind of other metadata? There's usually, the way that search engines are written, there's usually multiple steps as well, where you do a first pass retrieval, where you go from hundreds of millions of documents or even billions of documents down to just a handful. And then there's usually a re-ranking step that's much more computationally intensive, where you really pick out which snippets in the documents are you actually finding the answer in. So all of these components here have an influence on the context length. When you say you have 10 legal documents of 10 pages, how do you get to them? And what is the effect of pasting entire documents versus just a paragraph or two from each document? And typically what people find is the less context you need to provide, especially if the answer is in that context, the easier it is for the large language model to find the right answer. Seems pretty obvious, but that then becomes a retrieval problem. How do I find within if I have 100 million documents, each 10 pages long, how do I find the 2 paragraphs that actually answer the question? So a hope really has been in large language model development to just increase the context length and to rely less on more and more accurate retrieval, but rather let the language model figure it out. Being able to handle longer context also allows you to give much more contextualized answers. If you have the entire 10-page document, even if the answer is found in just one paragraph, it can still give you the context from page 1, or tell you what is this document type, where is it from, what was in the intro, what did the executive summary of this document say in contrast to the actual document. If we go into voice, like what was the intonation? If we go into video, there's so many opportunities to take advantage of longer context. But again, we have to really consider, how are the models being deployed? How are they? Who are the users of this? What is the application? And every single one of these design decisions I just talked about can influence the helpfulness and the harmful or harmlessness, in this case, of the entire system. So this is a massive undertaking and requires a lot of research.